Every single day, roughly 300 million women around the world are on their period. That number is bigger than the entire population of the United States. It has been happening without interruption for as long as human beings have existed on this planet, hundreds of thousands of years. And yet, if you flip through a high school history textbook, you will find pages on wars, on kings, on the exact trade routes of ancient merchants selling grain. You will find almost nothing about this. Not a chapter, not a paragraph, barely a footnote, which means that one of the most consistent, most recurring biological events in the entire history of our species has been almost completely erased from the official story we tell about ourselves. So today, we fix that. We're going back, all the way back, to the very beginning of what it meant to be a woman navigating this experience with no guide, no products, no explanation, and no one who had ever left a manual behind. Let's go back roughly 50,000 years. A girl, somewhere on the African continent, though it could have been almost anywhere humans had spread by then. She is maybe 15, 16 years old. She has been running, foraging, carrying things, surviving in ways most of us would find unimaginable. And one morning, she wakes up to something she has never seen before and cannot explain. Here is what we know with certainty. She was not reading a pamphlet about it. There was no app sending her a notification 3 days in advance. Whatever understanding she had came from the women around her. Older women, mothers, aunts, community members, or it came from sheer immediate confusion. Now here is something researchers actually measured that most people don't know. The age this girl experienced her first period would have been significantly later than what we consider normal today. In modern, well-nourished societies, the average age of first menstruation, called menarche, falls somewhere between 12 and 13 years old. But anthropologists who study contemporary hunter-gatherer communities, groups whose lifestyle is the closest living window we have into our prehistoric ancestors, found something different. The Kungsan people of the Kalahari, for example, were studied extensively by anthropologist Nancy Howell in the 1970s. Her data showed menarche occurring on average around age 16. Why the difference? The body is not on a fixed timer. It is running a continuous internal calculation. Do I have enough stored energy to support reproduction? Endocrinologist Rose Frisch proposed that a critical threshold of body fat, roughly 17%, is required before the process can even begin. Later research challenged and refined those exact numbers, but the underlying logic held. Leaner bodies under constant physical demand delay the onset of puberty. A prehistoric teenage girl who was walking miles daily, eating irregularly, and burning enormous amounts of energy just staying alive, her body would have held off, not forever, but later. So when we imagine that first moment of confusion in prehistory, we are likely imagining a 15 or 16-year-old, not a 12-year-old. And then what? This is where we have to be genuinely honest with you. We don't fully know. There are no cave paintings with captions, no stone tablets with instructions. Whatever prehistoric women used to manage their cycles, whatever plant fibers, soft animal hides, mosses, or absorbent materials they fashioned, those things were organic. And organic material does not fossilize. It does not survive tens of thousands of years in soil. It decays completely, leaving no trace that archaeologists can ever dig up and point to. What we can say is that the materials existed. Soft plant fibers were already in use for wound care. Animal hides were processed for clothing. Moss was used for all kinds of absorption tasks. It is a reasonable, evidence-supported inference that women used whatever was already part of daily life. But an inference and a confirmed historical fact are two very different things, and anyone who tells you otherwise is filling in blanks with imagination, not evidence. What is slightly more recoverable than the objects themselves is human behavior across cultures. When anthropologists studied uncontacted or minimally contacted traditional societies that had not been influenced by Western ideas about shame and secrecy, they found something consistent and striking. First periods were not hidden. Across cultures that had no contact with each other, separated by thousands of miles and entirely different belief systems, menarche was treated as a significant event. Sometimes it meant a period of ritual seclusion. Sometimes it meant a community ceremony. Sometimes it meant celebration and feast. The specifics varied enormously, but the common thread was this. The moment was acknowledged. It was marked. It was considered important. The idea that a period is something unspeakable, something embarrassing, something to hide, that appears to be a cultural development, not a universal human instinct. The moment human beings invented writing, they did something interesting. They wrote about this. Almost immediately. The oldest surviving gynecological document in human history is the Kahun Papyrus, an Egyptian medical text dating back to approximately 1800 BCE, that is 3,800 years ago. And this document does not treat menstruation as a footnote. It addresses it directly, alongside pregnancy, fertility issues, and contraception. as a serious medical matter worthy of formal documentation. Egypt did not stop there. Around 1550 BCE, the Ebers Papyrus expanded on this. It drew a medical distinction between regular and irregular menstrual cycles, treating the difference as a diagnostic indicator, a sign that something in the body was or was not functioning correctly. These were not folk remedies or superstitions. These were trained physicians using the presence, absence, and pattern of a woman's cycle as a clinical tool. Let that land for a moment. 30,500 years ago, Egyptian doctors were tracking menstrual cycles as part of serious medical practice. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the ancient world, the approach was more complicated. The Roman author Pliny the Elder, not exactly known for scientific precision, wrote extensively about menstruation in his Natural History, completed around 77 CE. His claims range from the merely incorrect to the spectacularly wrong. He suggested that contact with a menstruating woman could sour wine, kill crops, rust iron, and make dogs go mad if they tasted the blood. These were not fringe opinions. They were recorded by one of Rome's most widely read intellectuals and taken seriously for centuries. This is the split that defines ancient history on this topic. On one side, clinical, grounded medicine. On the other, superstition and fear dressed up as knowledge. But medicine kept advancing. A physician named Cyrannus of Ephesus, practicing in the late 1st and early 2nd century CE, wrote a 4-volume medical text called Gynecology that would influence medicine for over 1,000 years. He approached menstruation with a precision that was extraordinary for his time. He described normal versus abnormal cycles, gave clinical criteria for diagnosis, and, most remarkably, recommended rest and reduced physical activity for women experiencing particularly painful periods. A Roman doctor, nearly 2,000 years ago, writing, "Give her time to rest. There is something almost surreal about that. After the ancient world, something shifts. Through much of medieval Europe, the clinical approaches of Cyrannus and the Egyptian physicians got buried under layers of theological interpretation and social anxiety. Menstruation became increasingly associated with ideas of impurity, drawn partly from religious texts, interpreted by institutions that had very strong opinions about women's bodies and very little medical understanding. Women were excluded from certain religious spaces. Theories circulated in medical and scholarly texts about the dangers of menstrual blood, most of them with no empirical basis. The careful Egyptian physician tracking a woman's cycle as a health indicator gave way, in many contexts, to the menstruating woman as someone to be kept apart, to be cautious around. This was not universal. Not every culture in this period treated it the same way. Across Asia, across parts of Africa, across indigenous American communities, you find a wildly diverse range of attitudes, some restrictive, some celebratory, many simply practical. But in terms of the historical record that has dominated the Western cultural memory most people inherit, the medieval period represents a step backward, and it lasted a long time. Now here is where the story gets genuinely strange. We have established that menstruation has existed for the entire history of the human species. We have established that ancient Egyptian doctors were treating it as a medical matter 30,500 years ago. We have established that women have been managing this every month with whatever resources were available to them for hundreds of thousands of years. So here is the question. When did the modern products we now treat as completely ordinary show up? Almost yesterday. Historically speaking, the first commercially manufactured menstrual pad was a product called Lister's towels, introduced in the United States around 1896. It was made by Johnson & Johnson. It was a commercial disaster, not because the product did not work, but because the cultural silence around menstruation was so total, so deeply embedded, that there was no way to advertise it. Stores were reluctant to stock it openly. Women were too embarrassed to ask for it by name. The product existed. Nobody bought it. What changed everything was, of all things, a war. During World War I, nurses working in field hospitals made an accidental discovery. Cotton, a wood pulp-based material developed as a wound dressing because it absorbed blood far better than cotton, was far superior to anything they had been using for their own personal care. When the war ended, the manufacturer, Kimberly-Clark, made a pivot. They rebranded the material, launched it as Kotex in 1920, and this time, with a marketing strategy designed to work around the cultural discomfort, including anonymous ordering by mail, it sold. The tampon followed. Dr. Earl Haas filed the patent for a modern internal applicator design in 1931. The Tampax Corporation launched it commercially in the mid-1930s. Read those dates again. Human beings have been menstruating for, at minimum, 300,000 years. The products now sitting in every pharmacy in the world, treated as completely unremarkable necessities, have existed for barely 100 of those years. For the other 299,900 years, every generation of women simply handled it themselves, with whatever was available, with no instruction, no standardized product, and in most historical periods, almost complete public silence about what was happening. There is a pattern running through this entire history that is worth naming clearly. The experience was universal. The erasure was deliberate. Every woman who ever lived experienced this. Queens and enslaved women, warriors and scholars, farmers and merchants. Every single one of them, every month for the majority of their lives. And the collective knowledge they built about what works, what helps, what to expect, was passed down generation to generation through conversations that history almost never recorded. That knowledge was considered too ordinary to write down, or too shameful, or too specific to women's experience to be taken seriously in official documents. Pick your era, you can find a different reason. The result was the same, a near-total gap in the historical record about something that affected half of all humans who ever lived. The Egyptian doctors broke through that in meaningful ways. So did Cyrannus. Modern medicine eventually caught up completely. But the cultural discomfort, the idea that this is a private, embarrassing, unspeakable thing, persisted well into the 20th century, and in many places persists today. And here is what strikes me about all of this. That first prehistoric girl, the one we started with, she figured it out. With no products, no information, no one who had written anything down, she adapted. So did every woman who came after her for thousands of generations, under conditions far more difficult than anything most of us will ever face. There's something genuinely remarkable about that. A quiet, unrecorded, relentless competence running through all of human history, never acknowledged in the official story, until now. If you made it this far, you already know you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. You are not here for shallow takes. You are not here to be told what everyone already knows. You are here because you want to understand the parts of history that got left out, the experiences that got dismissed, the stories that deserve to be told but never were. That is what we do here. Every single video. If that is what you are looking for, the subscribe button is right there. And if you want to know which overlooked corner of history we go into next, turn on notifications. Because the next one is a story that has been hidden for even longer than this one. Menstruation is not a medical anomaly. It is not a modern inconvenience. It is not something that belongs in hushed tones or awkward whispers. It is one of the oldest recurring human experiences on Earth. It shaped biology, influenced medicine, drove accidental industrial innovation, and ran silently beneath the surface of every civilization that ever existed. The fact that most people know almost nothing about its history is not an accident. It is a choice. A long series of choices made by people who decided this story was not worth telling. We disagree.